Hello, welcome. This is Jennifer. I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited because today I get to share with you about a new die cut machine that has a lot to offer. But before we get started, I wanted to remind you all that there are a lot of great die cut machines on the market, and they all have different things they offer. In fact, I like to think of die cut machines like shoes. Everyone has different needs in shoes. Some people need dress shoes because they go to business meetings. Some people need super comfy shoes because they're like me and just like that comfort. Everybody's got something different, right? So it's good that there are different options in shoes available. It doesn't mean one is better than the other. Same thing with die cut machines. So today is another option, and I'm going to show you what some of the features are about this die cut machine that stand out that might be a game changer for you. It all depends on how you craft and what your needs are. I will walk through everything about the machine and how you do all the things you need to do on it. But stay tuned because at the end I'm going to talk about another product, not die cut machine related, but something you'll need to check out. So this is the new Gina K Designs Intri-Cut die cutting and embossing machine. What's neat about this machine is it is adjustable, so you don't have to fuss with figuring out what sandwich you need to do different things with the machine, and I'll talk all through that. On the side there are two dials. The first dial lets you switch between doing die cutting, 2D embossing folders, and 3D embossing folders. And yes, I'll show you how to use this machine with foiling machines and Betterpress. Then there is a second dial, and that lets you fine tune. So say you have a tricky die that is very intricate, you can make it a little tighter, or you can make it a little looser. So this is completely adjustable so that you don't have to have a bunch of different plates for the different processes on one machine. Instead, you just turn the knob and you only have to work with two plates. I have never used an adjustable die cut machine like this, and it really is helpful because it takes the guesswork out of what sandwich to use. So if you're someone who struggles with what sandwich to use for different things you do on your die cut machine, this might be a good option for you. Before I demonstrate the dials, I want to talk more about the machine because there's actually some other features that are really great. Another great feature is the hand crank itself. This is a manual machine, and the hand crank comes on and off easily in case you like to take it with you on the go. There is this little unlock and lock switch. You just hold it to unlock and it pops right onto the side of the machine and it's ready to use. You just let go of the unlock and it just clips right on, no problem at all, and it's ready to go. And it's easy to take off. Just switch to unlock and it pops right off. Another fun feature is that when you pull the sides of the die cut machine down, which you do to do the die cutting, those two sides actually open up and it's a storage space. So on one side you could put the handle of the die cut machine to store it. On the other side I put one of my pick and stick tools and some Easy C tape, which I use when I'm die cutting. So this is a great way to keep track of all the things you need when you use the die cut machine. Another great feature is this machine has feet that will suction on your desktop. So when you pull the sides down, it suctions there. I'm working on glass, so it suctions nice on glass. It just depends on what kind of work surface you work on, but glass, it suctions on there great and it will not move. So you can actually crank this one-handed with no problem. When you put the sides back up, the suction releases and you can move it easily. Let's next talk about the plates that come with the machine. There are 3 plates that come with it. First is the thick white platform. The second is the gray cutting plate. And the third is the clear adapter plate. Now that clear plate, or that frosty looking plate there, I don't use that one. That is for steel rule dies. Know that that's available, but I won't be demonstrating with that today. For everything that I'm doing, these are the 2 plates I need: the white platform and the gray cutting mat. And there are replacement cutting mats available. Now with these 2 plates, you can do embossing folders, die cutting, making impression with die, and more. I like that these plates have reminder text on them. For example, on the platform it says this is not a cutting surface, so it reminds you not to put your die face down on it. Then on the cutting mat it has a reminder too. It reminds you to use both sides of the cutting mat, flip it around so you can avoid warping, and it recommends that you use your die in different spots on the plate so you're not always cutting into the same spot. This will help to make your cutting mat last longer. But I have off-screen used my cutting mat many times, and I have found zero warping because it's nice and thick. The plate that I have here is my replacement cutting mat, so it's nice and smooth. I just wanted to show you what it looked like, but you'll see my used cutting mat in a moment. The cutting mat will last you a long time, but as with every die cut machine, cutting mats are eventually meant to be replaced. So there are replacement cutting mats available separately, which you can see the packaging of here. So in the box for the Intri-Cut die cut machine, you have the platform, the cutting mat, the adapter plate, which I really don't use all that often, but it's good to have, and it comes with a large starter die set. Now, this is nice because these are dies that I would use often. That Hello die is fantastic. I'll demonstrate with that in a moment. I believe this die set is almost $30 in value, and it comes with the machine. I also will demonstrate using that large heart die to make an impression on cardstock. If you do invest in this die cut machine, there's one more thing I recommend buying, and that is the flexible black silicone mat. This mat will allow you to use this die cut machine to make an impression with a die, a foil plate, or a stencil, and I will demonstrate some of that later in this video. So that's the black mat that you see there, and between that and the plates that come with the machine, you're ready to go with whatever you could possibly want to do with a die cut machine. By the way, remember you can always cut your packaging up and keep that with your machine if you have trouble remembering some settings. But a little tip, I will give you everything you need to know over on my blog, so you don't have to remember a thing. Just print that out and you'll be ready to go. Of course, the machine does come with a manual that tells you everything you need to know. I do encourage you to check that out. Sometimes I flip my plates over and all that, but if you're a rule follower and want to follow what is recommended, you'll want to look in this manual. It also tells you all the different mediums you can cut with the machine, and it tells you all the settings you need to know. But again, it's really easy to figure out. One more thing I forgot to mention before is when you pull the sides down, you can actually push them in a little bit so they lock in place. I usually skip this because I'm somewhat lazy when I'm doing my die cutting, so you can see how you can pull it down, pop it in if you wanted to. Okay, let's start using the machine, and we'll demonstrate first with die cutting because that's what we'll use the machine for the most. It's very easy. On the first dial, you'll set it to die cut. The second dial, I like to just use 0. Sometimes I use -1, but most of the time I use 0. I'll talk about different settings for die cutting a little bit later. But for most dies in general, I use setting 0. You don't have to remember all of these settings. They're very obvious, and I also have them all typed up over on my blog, so you can go over there and just print them out and keep them with your machine. All right, so I have it set to die cut and just at 0. I have my 2 plates, the platform and the cutting mat, and I have a piece of heavyweight cardstock here that I'll demonstrate with. I have the Hello die that came with the machine. Now the platform you never cut into, so basically remember that the back of the die touches the platform, so you can see the cutting edge is facing up. You'll then place your cardstock on top of that, and then the cutting mat. Now remember the sharp edges of the die are facing up, so it'll cut into the cutting mat, so we know we're doing it right. I can take this and run it through the die cut machine, and you'll see that it cuts beautifully. Now there are a few different ways you can do this die cutting process. I'll demonstrate them. Just pick whichever one makes the most sense to you. And by the way, watch as I die cut. I don't need to hold the machine as I crank it because it's suctioned to my glasswork surface. Let's do that again, but this time I'm going to tape my die to the cardstock. I like to use Easy C tape. I find it doesn't tear my paper and I can reuse it a few times. I'll tape it to my paper where I want it to cut, flip it over so the back side of the die is touching the white platform, put the cutting mat on top, and run it through. This is the exact same way as we did before. I just use a piece of tape to hold that die on the cardstock, and you can see it'll cut beautifully again. Another way you can do the same sandwich is to take the cutting plate. On that gray cutting plate, you put your piece of cardstock, and then on top of the cardstock, you put your die. So the die is facing down this time, so it'll cut into that gray cutting plate. Then you put the white platform on top of that, and then flip the sandwich over and run that through your die cut machine. So it's actually the exact same thing we've done a couple times here. I just start by putting everything face down onto the cutting plate and then flip the sandwich over. All of these are the same. In every case, the back of the die touches the white platform plate. You never want to cut into that. And then every time you're cutting into that gray mat. Each time I place my die in a different spot on that cutting mat, and I can flip the cutting mat over and cut into the back side of it too. That will extend the life of that cutting mat. But I'm finding that the material that this cutting mat is made from really holds up nicely, and I think it'll last me quite a while. But remember, every cutting plate, no matter what die cut machine you have, is meant to be replaced over time. So in most cases when I'm doing die cutting, I have it set to die cut and then the bottom dial set to 0. However, if you have a really intricate, tricky die, you can adjust that bottom dial and it'll make it cut a little bit tighter, give a little more pressure for those tricky dies. I have this new Gina K background die that has a lot of intricate cutting to it, so I thought I'd demonstrate adjusting that bottom dial with this. For this intricate die, I'm going to change it so that it's like a -3, which makes it tighter. With most die cut machines, you would need a metal shim to add that additional pressure. Here, you don't need one. You just turn that dial a bit. So let's die cut with this intricate die. I have heavyweight white cardstock. I'll put the die onto it and put a piece of tape in place. And you can see I have my cutting mat on my desk here. Now, whenever you have a straight edge die like this, I recommend cutting it at an angle. That will also help your plates last longer. On top of that, I'll put my platform. I'll flip that over and run it through the die cut machine. This will die cut it beautifully because we have that bit of extra pressure for that intricate large die. So with this machine, you do not need a metal shim. You just turn that bottom crank to make it a bit tighter. Before we move on, I did want to reiterate how important it is to cut into both sides of your cutting mat and to move around on the cutting mat where you cut. This will extend the life of your cutting mat no matter what machine you have. Also, if your die has a long straight edge like this die does, always put the die through at a bit of an angle. That will help to prevent warping too. By the way, I'm going to quick switch to my other cutting mat, the one that I've been using a lot off screen. I've been using this die cut machine for a few weeks now, and you can see that there's no warping to it and the wear is pretty minimal. But again, cutting mats and cutting plates are meant to be replaced over time. But this is holding up nicely. I think it's because it's thicker than most. Okay, let's move on to how we do embossing folders. Now, there are two different types of embossing folders out there. 2D, the traditional type, or 3D, which are thicker. Let's first look at 2D embossing folders. You don't need any additional plates with this machine because of the dial on the side. I will be demonstrating with one of my most used embossing folders. This is the Gina K Designs Swiss Dot. This is a 2D or traditional embossing folder. There are two ways to tell if your embossing folder is 2D. One is if you look at it from the side, it's pretty thin. 3D will be much thicker. Or you can check at the manufacturer's website for the product. It should tell you. Now, 2D embossing folders means that it makes an impression and you'll have raised areas and lowered areas. Whenever I use an embossing folder, I like to mist both sides of the cardstock with a bit of water and then place it into the folder. Now, for a 2D embossing folder, it's very easy. Just set the dial, the top dial, to the Letterpress or 2D Emboss, which stands for 2D embossing folder. So that's the middle spot there for the dial. That's all you got to do. The bottom dial, I just leave at 0. So remember, the best part about this machine is that I'm still only using those same two plates, the same ones that I used for die cutting, my platform and my cutting mat. I'll put my embossing folder between it and run it through, and this will give me a beautiful impression. So the only difference between doing this and die cutting is that I turn that one knob from die cut to 2D. Next, let's look at 3D embossing folders. 3D embossing folders are thicker, and you end up with a piece of cardstock that has raised areas, flat areas, and a little bit of dimension between. They are beautiful and becoming more popular. The trick with 3D embossing folders is they're not all the same thickness. Now, most of them are the same, but Simon Says Stamp has some that are thicker, which gives even more dimension. So I'm going to demonstrate both. On the left there, I have Altenew, and that is a typical 3D embossing folder. You can see the thickness there. Then the other is Simon Says Stamp, which is even thicker. Let's demonstrate the more common 3D embossing folder with the Altenew. For almost all 3D embossing folders, you just need to switch the dial to 3D emboss, which is 3D embossing folders, and leave the dial on the bottom at 0. So I have an Altenew 3D embossing folder here. This is a good one. It's the Wicker texture. I will mist both sides of my cardstock and put it into the embossing folder. And then again, we're using the same two plates, the white platform and the gray cutting mat. We'll put the embossing folder in between and run it through, and we'll get beautiful results. So what you can see is with this adjustable die cut machine, you always put everything between the platform plate and the cutting mat. You just change the dials depending on what you're doing. Now let's look at those thicker Simon Says Stamp 3D embossing folders. They have so many beautiful designs available, and the fact that they're thicker allows you to get even more dimension. Now I played around with this for a while to figure out the best way to use these thicker folders, and it's easy. For this, all you need is the platform, then your folder on top, and you're going to skip the cutting mat. This is the only time you would do that is for these embossing folders. I still have the dial on the top at 3D embossing, and then the dial on the bottom I'm going to put as tight as it can be at -5. Then I will put the platform and the embossing folder through it. Again, we're skipping that cutting mat. And this will give just the right amount of pressure. Now please keep in mind that you'll always want to test these things and never force anything through. If it doesn't want to go through, back off the pressure a little bit with that dial. But look at the beautiful results you get. I'm so glad that now I don't have to figure out that sandwich every time. Next, let's look at embossing with dies. This is where you take a die and you make an impression in your cardstock instead of cutting the cardstock. This is often referred to as embossing with a die or dry embossing. And it kind of gives a letterpress look. So to demonstrate this, I have heavyweight white cardstock and one of the dies that came with the machine. Now we'll turn the dial on our machine to the letterpress 2D emboss. So we're getting that letterpress look by making an impression with a die. So that's why we're using that middle setting. As far as the dial on the bottom, I'll just turn it to 0. In most cases, 0 is what you need. Okay, so now for this, we also need that black silicone mat that I told you about before. That is the only thing sold separate that I think is good to have with this machine. This flexible mat will allow you to make an impression with a die instead of cutting with it. But once again, you still only need those same two plates with the mat. You need the platform, the gray cutting mat, and now we add in that silicone black mat. As always, the back of the die goes onto the platform, so I'll flip this over. Then on top of that, we will put our black silicone mat. That way, we're making impression instead of cutting with the die. Then on top of that, we have our cutting mat, and we run that through the machine. So as always, you have your platform and your cutting mat, and whatever you're doing goes between it. In this case, your cardstock, your die, and that flexible black mat. Once we run this through, you'll see that we get a beautiful impression with that die. Now, if you want less of an impression, you can change the bottom dial so that it is looser. If it's looser, it puts less pressure, and you can have a softer impression made with the die. You have the flexibility with this. So let me demonstrate that. I'm going to do the exact same sandwich, the same cardstock, the same plates, and the same die, but I'm going to change the bottom dial to be loose. So I'm setting it at a 5. That means we'll be putting less pressure on it when we go through the machine. And you're going to get a different look after we run it through. This will give us less pressure, which means you'll get less of an impression. So on the left is the one I just did with less pressure. The one on the right is the one I did before. This is really helpful because every die makes a different type of impression. You don't want to tear your cardstock or make it rough. And because you have that flexibility with that bottom dial, you don't have to worry about that anymore. And you don't have to worry about the sandwiches. You always use those same two plates and just change up what's between them. All right, next let's look at embossing or dry embossing or making an impression with stencils. This is something I think we often forget to do, but it gives great results. By the way, I'm sorry if you hear any noise in the background. I'm on vacation in the mountains in a house with 7 teenage boys, so you might hear some air hockey in the background. Okay, so I have the Gina K Design Sweater Weather Stencil. Any stencil would work for this technique. We're going to use the machine to make an impression with the stencil. To do so, we leave that top dial at Letterpress 2D Emboss, but the bottom dial I'm just turning a little bit tighter to -1. Doesn't take much, but because stencils are thinner than dies, we just need to add a little more pressure. I'll use the same sandwich that I did to make an impression with a die, but this time we'll use a stencil. So we'll have our black flexible silicone mat, the cardstock, and the stencil, and that goes between our white platform and our gray cutting mat. This results in the stencil leaving an impression on our cardstock. This is a great way to get more life out of any stencil that you may have. It's especially good with patterns like the one we have here. Okay, let's move on to tools that you use with your die cut machine. One tool or system that works with a die cut machine is the Spellbinders Betterpress. This gives you a faux letterpress look that has great detail. I love this system. The Betterpress system works with the Spellbinders Platinum, but I found it also works with the Intri-Cut. So here I have my Spellbinders Betterpress system. It's the platform here, and I have a complete video talking about how to use this system. I'm just going to show it briefly here. I'll link to that video up here on the top right and in my description below. To use it, you flip the top clear plate over and temporarily adhere your cardstock. I like to do it between the little tick marks on the Betterpress plate. That way I know everything will line up. Next, you'll take your Betterpress plate. These plates can also be used to foil on your Glimmer machine, but this will give a beautiful faux letterpress look with great detail. So I'll place this right onto the gray magnetic portion of the Betterpress system. Next, you'll ink this up. Now, there are specialty Betterpress inks, but I found you really can use other inks that you have on hand, such as the Gina design ink. So I'm just dabbing this ink onto the Betterpress plate. Then I'll put the clear plate on top that has our cardstock attached. So the cardstock will go face down. Now, this doesn't make contact with our inked plate. It just kind of hovers over it. But when you take this whole platform and run it through your machine, it'll give pressure. Now, the sandwich that I'm using here is the Letterpress 2D dial, and you set the bottom dial to 0. So it's easy to remember. For Betterpress, you set the top dial to Letterpress and leave the bottom at 0. When you run that through, that presses that plate into the cardstock and leaves the ink behind. It gives a slight impression, but more importantly, it gives great detail, and you get beautiful results. So if you have a Betterpress system, you can use it with the Gina Intri-Cut machine. Again, I'm just showing this Betterpress system very quickly. I do have a more complete video you can check out if you're interested. All right, next I thought I'd show how you can use a Glimmer foil machine with the Gina Design's Intri-Cut machine. I'm going to show the Glimmer process very quickly. If you want a more in-depth tutorial on how to use this machine, I'll link it up here on the top right and in my description below. This is the Spellbinders Glimmer machine, and I've given it some time to heat up. Onto the warm gray portion, I've put a Fawn hot foil plate, and then a piece of Spellbinders foil face down onto it. Then I can place a piece of white cardstock in the 2 plates that come with the Glimmer machine. I'll press the timer button and let it go until it stops flashing. This will heat up the plate. Now, the process that I'm doing here is the exact same as I would with a different die cut machine, but here you just set the top dial to Letterpress 2D Emboss, and then the bottom dial to -3. And I found that does a great job foiling. So when the timer went off, I ran it through the machine, and then we can bring it out and look at, we get this beautiful transfer of foil. So yes, you can use your Glimmer Hot Foil machine with the Intri-Cut die cut machine. I did just do this once, and you can see you get good results. You may need to adjust that bottom dial depending on the plate, but it seems to work just fine. So there's a closer look at the new Gina Intri-Cut die cut machine. I thought it'd be good to show you how to use it with all the different things that you like to do with a die cut machine, so you could see the advantages that it has. Again, everybody's needs are different. I really try hard to find and try as many different tools out there as I can, and then bring to you the ones that I think are top notch, and then you can decide based on the features what works best for you. Now, before we go, I did want to mention something else that's new from Gina Designs, simply because I did a live with Gina last week, and we talked about this product, and now it's available. So I just wanted to show it to you now. Gina K has a whole line of products for foiling. It's a different type of foiling than I just demonstrated. This is the type of foiling that you do with a laminating system. Gina has a product called Polyglaze, which is white cardstock printed with a pattern on it that will foil. This one here is a snowflake pattern. Now the printing on it is very light, so you can barely see it, but when you lay foil on top of it, such as the Gina K Design Fancy Foil, and then put it into a carrier sheet or folded piece of printer paper or parchment paper, and run it through a laminator or a foiling system such as the Gina K Fuse, that foil will stick to the polyglaze, leaving perfect foiling every time. And I demonstrated this a lot in my live with Gina. She showed some techniques too, and I just wanted to fill you in on a new product that makes this even better. So here we have our foiled cardstock, but remember we have this leftover negative piece here, and we don't want that to go to waste. Now Gina has full sheet polyglaze. So this is white cardstock and the entire surface is printed with the polyglaze material. So when we put our negative space foil piece onto it, it will all stick. So we're able to get a foiled piece of cardstock with that negative leftover piece. So after I run it through, I can peel off that extra foil, and now we have two pieces, one with the positive snowflakes and one with the negative. Both beautiful shine. Now, I made a little mistake here, and I thought I would just share it in the video. When you do this, make sure you cover your entire polyglaze piece with foil. I didn't cover it all, so some of the polyglaze got stuck to the inside of my carrier sheet. That's okay. It'll still work fine. I'm just running the carrier sheet through with a piece of printer paper in it, and that'll take away some of that stick. Not a problem. I can keep using it. I make a lot of mistakes. I usually edit them out, but I thought I'd include it in this time. Now here's the cool thing. From that piece that we just did, where we used the negative piece on the full sheet of polyglaze, remember in those open snowflakes where it's white, it's still that polyglaze. We can foil on those white snowflakes now because it's still polyglaze exposed. So I've got another piece of foil. This time I have some sparkling silver foil from Gina. I'm going to place that on top of that same piece we just did with the negative space. And now the silver foil will stick to wherever we have the exposed white snowflakes. So now we'll end up with a blue foil background in silver snowflakes. So you just can keep going with the foiling process using all of your leftover pieces. So now we have that silver negative space piece. We don't want that to go to waste. So I'll take another piece of full sheet polyglaze, that new product, lay the silver onto it, run it through our fuse machine or a laminator. Now you could stop here and just have white snowflakes with that sparkling silver background. But if you want to keep going, grab another piece of colored foil. Here I grab Passionate Pink foil from Gina K Designs, lay that on top, run it through, and we'll end up with pink snowflakes on a silver background. So the possibilities are endless by having this full sheet of polyglaze. The foil will stick to it anywhere, so it's a great way to use your negative pieces of foil. So again, I just wanted to mention this quickly, that this is available now because Gina mentioned it in our last live. I will link to that so you can check it out if you missed it. It'll be here at the end of this video and in the description below. Okay, so there you have it, a look at this new machine, another great option for crafters. If you're interested in anything I talked about, it is linked below in my description. And there's a link to my blog where I will have listed all the different settings for all the different things you could want to do with this machine. Just print it out and save it, and you'll be ready to create. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.